Patriots Beat podcast. I don't know if we call it a Q&A at this point. It's a Q&A, free agency, mismatch.
Whatever it is, whatever you want.
Everything you want to talk about.
It's really the friends we made along the way.
We did make a lot of friends along the way this week, and we really do appreciate it.
Yes.
From everybody that has watched us all week long, subscribe to the YouTube channel. All of that stuff is very much appreciated. So thank you from Alex, from myself, from CLNS. It was a huge success, and we're going to continue to do it week in and week out. So make sure to keep it here with us throughout the entire offseason and going into next season as well, which is getting a whole lot more interesting and more exciting as the days kind of go on here. And the Patriots got another break today, Alex, by adding a 5th-round compensatory pick to their draft haul. So the Patriots now have 10 draft selections instead of 9. The league went back. They realized they made a mistake in the original comp pick formula, and they awarded the Patriots with another comp pick in the 5th round of the draft. So a lot of those things are very interesting to me, right? Is what happened the first time around. This is a formula, right? It's
right.
Value in versus value out. There doesn't people that do math understand once you check your work, you're really not supposed to mess those things up. So the Patriots, somebody called the league office, and my guess is the Patriots and Bill Belichick might have known the comp pick formula even better than the league office did and said,
yeah,
hey guys, I think you guys made a mistake here. Maybe you should go ahead and check your math.
You think there were a couple 4-letter words on that phone call? Yeah, I think that, well, it is a new formula. It is the first year for the formula. And if you remember, when they first put it out there, right, they instantly retracted it and then put it out again. And there were some minor tweaks. I don't think any teams gained or lost picks. I think they flipped the order of 1 or 2. But this is pretty bad. This is pretty embarrassing for the league. I know people think, comp picks, it's not a big deal. In the grand scheme of things, it's probably not. But brand new formula. It clearly wasn't ready. And there's supposed to be a limit on the number of comp picks that are allowed. It's supposed to be capped at 32, and They can fall in a different range of rounds, but they can't take one away from the Bears. The Bears have spent, and they would have been the 33rd team had the formula been used correctly. The Bears have been planning for 3 weeks like they had this pick. The league can't take it away from them. They might have taken it away from the Patriots in that scenario, but they're not going to do it to a team that's dumb enough to fall for Andy Dalton. So now there's 33 comp picks. That's an extra advantage. Again, it's not going to be the downfall of the NFL, but somebody's got egg on their face. This is really not a good look.
Yeah, and like I just said, this is math. This is just a typical formula.
Well, look, I hate all math in sports, so I'm not going to go down that road. But look,
I'm not a mathematician either, but this is probably like some Excel spreadsheet or something like that that's pre-programmed to just spit out, okay, this is what it looks like. This is what each team should get. And somebody dropped the ball, like you said. But for the Patriots, I think what you're seeing is that all of us, and Nick Courtier does a great job of projecting comp picks over the cap. That's what all of us beat writers use going into the draft before the league announces the official comp picks. We always use Nick's projections. And Nick had them getting 4 comp picks, and they only got 2, and it just didn't feel right? The value out did not match the value in for the amount of comp picks that they were getting back. You lose Tom Brady, Jamie Collins, Kyle Van Noy, Landon Roberts, Ted Carrick.
Yeah, Evan, but Damiere Byrd, though.
Right, Damiere Byrd, though, right? And you lose all these guys, and all you get back is a 3rd and a 4th round comp pick. And you purposely went into free agency. Now, the Patriots didn't have any money, and we can go down that road too. But I think a lot of the strategy here was they knew they lost Brady, and they knew that they could recoup a bunch of comp picks the next year. They didn't overspend in free agency necessarily because they knew that they were going to get awarded comp picks as a return for those guys that they lost. So that played a role in how the Patriots orchestrated their offseason last year. And then they get shorted a comp pick. They fixed it, so we can kind of stop crying about it now here in New England. But I think the next, now that we've taken a shot at the league and told them how silly this whole thing was, I think the next conversation is they have these 10 picks. They got 3 picks in the top 100. They got, 5 picks, in the first 4 rounds. What does the landscape now look like for them in terms of their needs, trading up for the quarterback? Let's start after free agency, after this dust has settled in the first week. I think we can both agree that quarterback is their biggest need in terms of long-term future. But what's their second biggest need, I guess, because we can argue about the quarterbacks in a second.
Yeah, so we still don't know. It was center, right? Until last night, as some people in the chat pointed out. Well done for the second night in a row. The Patriots make big
David
news.
Andrews. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, we'll get to David Andrews for the second night in a row. Is Van Noy and then Andrews. The Patriots make big news. They're going to sign James White tonight at like 11:30 p.m. probably. Just be rare. Whenever the best March Madness game is about to go to overtime, they're going to sign James White. So, as I look at it, again, I still think one of their biggest needs is pass catching running back. That's not something you're going to address in the first round. If they do, poor Evan's going to have a heart attack. But, if we're just talking about all things even, I think that's a need. I still think they could use another corner. Maybe that's as simple as bringing back Jason McCourty, right? They met with Desmond Trufant today. Doesn't need to be a superstar. So again, maybe not talking about a first round pick, just something for depth. Sure. That's obviously subject to change depending on what happens with Gilmore and Jackson. We'll look at that. After that, I think you start looking at, I think in terms of, this year being ready, I don't know that they have a ton of immediate holes anymore. I think you look at guys who potentially you bring in a year too early to get ready. You start thinking about, well, how many years does Devin McCourty have left? Do we want to bring in another deep safety? Do they want to try their hand at a wide receiver again? And maybe, get that guy going. So when Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith's contracts are up, they have a number one wide receiver. I think tackle's certainly high on that list. But in terms of immediate need, center, running back, not positions you're going to take in the first round. All the more reason for them to trade up.
Yeah, and we're going to get to the trade-up scenarios in a second, but you mentioned it, and you know where I'm going with it. I'm going tackle. I think that tackle is a really big need for them going into this draft.
Well, so let me ask you, do you see that as an immediate need or a need where you're projecting?
A projected need.
Okay,
and I think
I would agree with you there.
There is very, very big because at right tackle, you have Trent Brown on a 1-year contract right now. Are you going to give him another big contract after this? They seem content in giving Trent Brown that 1-year deal because they know that he's still betting on himself performing well this year to make some more cash next year. So are they going to hand out that big long-term extension to Trent Brown like the Las Vegas Raiders did? They didn't want to do it last offseason. I don't see them wanting to do it in the future, right? So 2 offseasons ago, excuse me. So I don't think that that's on the table. So Trent Brown is on a 1-year contract. Isaiah Wynn, we've talked a lot about his future. He's entering his 4th season now. He has the 5th-year option decision looming. I don't know if you have a guy behind either one of those guys, unless you really believe in Justin Herron as a future starter. I look at Justin Herron like right now as more of a third tackle, swing tackle.
Adrian Waddle type.
Right, like a very good backup tackle to have on your roster. But is he a starter that you want to pencil in there for 16-plus games every year? I'm not so sure. And if you look at this draft, and I know it's not the quarterback pick that everybody wants, but at the top of the draft, I'll just list off some names. You have Rashawn Slater, you have Christian Darrisaw, you have Liam Eichenberg, you have Jalen Mayfield, you have Taven Jenkins, you have Alex Leatherwood. I just won 6 of them, right, already.
And I think you missed Cosme's in there, right?
Cosme's a little bit later for me. Jackson Carman from Clemson, who's Trent Brown, 2.0, just a massive dude, right? Yep. He's huge. Dylan Raduns is a guy that I've talked a lot about from North Dakota State. I don't know if I'm saying his last name correctly, but I'm going to keep rolling.
That sounds right.
Yeah, and he's a really good tackle prospect too. So I see something like 10, 11, if you want to throw Walker Little in there as well, tackles going in the first 2 rounds of the draft in April. And that's a position that they're going to have to address long-term, and they're going to have a very, very highly rated player on their board available to them both at 15 and at 46. And it's going to be tough to pass on a tackle twice with the need that is there for them. Remember, Bill Belichick's one of those guys, too, that he looks at it for the next 4 or 5 years, right? He's not just necessarily looking at it for the immediate need. The other one is cornerback to me. I still think that that's pretty high up on the list. And again, it's a similar thing. If any position in this draft in terms of defense, not a great defensive draft this year. It's not very good, but cornerback, they do have some depth there, and there is some really good players at the top, like we've talked about multiple times on this show, with Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn and Caleb Farley right at the top there. And there are some guys in that top 50 range, I think, like a Asante Samuel Jr., for example, who are really good prospects as well. So cornerback, tackle, I think that if you want to just look at projecting in the next 3 to 4 years, because they filled so many immediate holes in free agency, I would look at it as a 3 to 4 year projection. Okay, Stephon Gilmore might not be here. J.C. Jackson might not be here. Who's our starting corners in 2 seasons? It might not be either one of those guys. So you have to be able to bring somebody else in. And I think that's where this draft might go if they don't just trade it all up for a quarterback. But now that we've talked about the other...
Hang on. You want some Patriots-related breaking news here?
Is it? Yeah, I think I know where you're going with this. Go for it.
Yeah, so we knew that they were talking to, and neither of us agreed with this as much as Evan made it sound like I did, that they were looking at one of the bigger body backs, and Chris Carson is returning to the Seahawks. That was a guy they had, I think it was Mike Giardi, right, had named that they were in touch with. So that's one guy off the board. Leonard Fournette was the other sort of, traditional early down back they were talking to. But if they still are in that market, it's getting a little thin. And do we have the money on that one? Yes. Oh, whoa. 2 years. Evan, did you see the money yet?
I did. Head's going to go across my phone.
2 years, $14.6 million.
Wow.
And that is the initial number. That's probably the max value, but 2 years, $15 million for running back, Evan. I'm fine that the Patriots missed on that. I'm more than okay with that.
I told you, don't overpay your running back. That's what the Seattle
overpay is a light word for that.
Okay, so it's a voided year structure. That's why the third year is in there. So this is what a lot of teams are doing. I don't want to go in a full nerd cap spiel right now, but these voided years are popping up everywhere across the league. The Patriots did it with Tom Brady. And remember, last year, the Patriots carried that cap hit on their cap with Tom Brady playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So essentially, the Patriots are paying Tom Brady to play for another team last year. So this structure is coming up because the league is so shrunk on cap space that teams have to come up with creative ways to fit guys under the cap. So what they're doing is they're tacking on these voided years. Voided structures are a dangerous game, though. If the player doesn't live up to the contract, if the team doesn't live up to the performance that you're hoping that you're going to getting in the life of the contract, then you're carrying that dead cap. And we heard last year, how many times did we talk about dead cap with the Patriots in 2020, especially during this period of time in free agency? That's why they weren't able to make moves, is because they had Tom Brady's dead cap hit. They had Antonio Brown's dead cap hit. So it's a very iffy strategy to me to hand out all these voided years structures. And it shows you why the league, where the league is doing it, because out of necessity. And I think that just tells you what this cap crunch, what this decrease in the cap has really done for teams. It's really sunk a lot of teams into these bad contracts, quite frankly, and bad contract structures. As a result, voided year should be an absolute last case scenario. And the fact that Seattle gave a voided year to a running back is a really dicey strategy.
Was it Tampa or Chicago, I saw the other day, has 3 void years on a kicker contract?
Yeah. I mean, it's just a bad strategy.
That's going to be, that's going to be outlawed at some point. Maybe it might take until the next CBA, which is 10 years from now, but I think at a certain point, and you get rid of it if you have fully guaranteed contracts with the player, which the players obviously want. Right. So that might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But I can't imagine. I mean, these have only been a thing for 3 or 4 years. They're going to get out of hand. You're going to start seeing Bobby Bonillas probably in the NFL at some point. Contracts are going to have, it's going to be a 20-year contract with 18 voided years. What's stopping teams from doing that?
Right. So the first team to really go all in on voided year structures were the Philadelphia Eagles in 2017. That Super Bowl team had a bunch of voided year contracts on it. And it worked out great for them because they were able to get all of these people under the cap in 2017 and win a Super Bowl. But now we've seen the effects of it in the long term, right? They've been a team that's been tied up against the cap ever since because they're still paying for that team in 2017. So as great as it is to win the Super Bowl in 2017, if you're the Eagles, now you're in this kind of situation where you're still paying guys that are not even on your team because of that structure. All right, let's go back to the draft, though. Patriots, again, resetting it, 10 picks in the draft, 3 in the top 100, 5 in the top 4 rounds. How much do you have to give up for a quarterback, I think, is a big question, right? And are you willing to go that extra mile to get the QB? To me, I think it starts, we mentioned number 6 as a potential destination for the Patriots with the Eagles trading out of that pick. I think it starts with a first this year at number 15, a 2022, first round pick, and then probably like a day 2 pick on top of that as filler, right? So you're talking about 3 draft picks most likely to move up to that 6-7 range. I think do you agree with that kind of trade package, and would you do it?
I think it would cost more than that, and I'd still do it. I think you're looking at 2 firsts and 2 seconds. And again, I would still do it. I think the competition is going to be so extreme Some of it depends what the Jets do it too, but there's a lot of teams trying to trade up right now. There really are, and it's going to be. We talked about this. I forget if it was earlier this week or last week. Throw out the trade chart. I think it's going to go well beyond that. I think you're going to have to overpay to move up. If they truly believe in the quarterback, I think it's worth it. I would do 2 firsts in 2 seconds, by the way, to move up and get Lance, because if Gilmore or Jackson get moved, you're going to get a 2nd round pick back in some sense between those guys. So that's one back. And then who knows? You might be in a position to make a trade. N'Keal, Isaiah Wynn, Sony Michel, these are all guys who could potentially be moved. You're not going to get a 2nd for any of those guys, but if you grab enough capital, the 4th, 5th round, maybe you can move back up. So they have the pieces to move around. The other thing is, and this is probably the bigger point, honestly, they have so many guys on the roster now, and they don't have a ton of free agents next year, right? Sure. So this roster that they built is really going to have a 2-year window. They only have so many spots to roster guys. And even in the 7th round, you don't want to pick a guy knowing full well he's not going to make the team. You want all your draft picks to have a chance. If they can't because of numbers, you need to consolidate picks and move up, because otherwise you're just drafting guys only to cut them 3 months later. That's a waste. So with the roster they've given themselves and with all these holes that they've filled, I don't just think that they should trade up. I think it would be irresponsible not to. I think they have to start consolidating picks in both 2021 and 2022. That's why with the Ryan Izzo trade, they got a 2022 second instead of 21. They just don't have space to make all these picks.
So I think that's a really great point. And one thing that I want to mention is that when you look at this defensive roster, I kind of am putting out in my mailbag tomorrow a projection of what the 11, 12 guys that are probably going to play the most snaps will look like and where they will play in the defense. And I look at this and I say, okay, what are you doing with the 3 guys you drafted at edge defender over the last 2 drafts? Right. Chase Winovich, Josh Uche, Anthony Jennings. Chase Winovich might be a guy that you can dangle. And I like Chase Winovich as a player. I think he's a good football player. But he's had trouble fitting into this system, right? He's had trouble setting the edge of the defense. He's had trouble with rush discipline, getting out of his rushing gaps. And they basically at times last year said, you know what, we're not even going to try to make you be a disciplined player on the edge when you rush the passer. And we're just going to let you pin your ears back, Winnow, and we're going to let everybody else is going to work on containing the pocket and keeping the quarterback at bay. But mainly, I think it's translating to be an odd system fit for Chase Winovich. He probably deserves to be in a different situation, maybe a 3-4 outside linebacker still, or maybe a 4-3 end, or all he has to do is rush the passer, right? Well, he can just pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. With his production, the ascension of his play every single year, how good he has looked at times on film, I think that you could get a 2nd round pick back for Chase Winovich. Not a top 50 pick, but maybe an end of a 2nd round pick, because you did pick him, I think it was 77 overall or something like that. And
sounds right, yeah.
And you could get a better pick than what you took with him. And now we're talking about accumulating picks for these trade up scenarios. So we've talked about Gilmore being traded. I think we've talked a little bit about Isaiah Wynn being traded. I wouldn't sleep on one of these defensive players that they've taken in the last couple of years getting traded, because they just don't have enough spots, like you said. And if you're going to play Matt Judon and you're going to play Kyle Van Noy and Dante Hightower as your 3 primary linebackers, there's not enough snaps to go around for those 3 guys that they just drafted in the last 2 years.
And the reality is, right, if they keep one of those top 100 picks, they're probably going to use it on a pass rusher who can't play. So they might as well move up. Some more Patriots adjacent breaking news. I'm bummed about this one, Evan. Yeah. Phillip Lindsey to the Houston Texans on a 1-year deal.
Nick Caserio scooped them up. That tells me that they might have had interest in the player.
Yes, right? It does. But it also tells me, let's go. It's Duke Johnson at this point. Is there anybody else? Is Damian Williams still out there? Did he sign?
He's still out there.
Okay, so there's still options, but they're starting to thin out in terms of that pass catcher. I am a little surprised Phillip Lindsey signed before James White. I think we're kind of learning how the league views James White at this point.
White, and look at a lot of what happened last year, and I think it's really important for any player that we talk about personal stuff and how that can impact a guy, right? Off-field concerns, issues off the field in terms of deaths in the family in James White's case, or something else going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Maybe there's an injury that we don't know about too with James White that was kind of brushed under the rug. He had a bad year last year by his standards and by a lot of standards, right? Had issues in bits pickup, wasn't as good in the passing game. He had a bad year, but he had a lot going on off the field. So you can obviously excuse it for that. But I think the main thing that you're seeing across the league with all these running backs is that you could get into a position now where you might have to be left drafting somebody. And are the Patriots going to trust a rookie in that role? I think that's a 0% chance that they throw a rookie, unless it's somebody that they really think is very, very good. Like,
right. Well, they might have to,
or something like that, right? You know,
right. But they might have to put a rookie in there. If James White goes to Tampa and Duke Johnson signs and Damian Williams signs, I mean, you're either going to have a rookie or a non-rookie who still has very little NFL experience. So they could eventually run out of options. I don't think Belichick will let it get to that, as much as you'd love to see that happen.
Right.
But, you know, they got to figure this out, because I maybe they're waiting on James White. I don't know, but eventually he's going to come off the board.
It does
once
kind of
he
feel
does,
like James White's options are Tampa or back here, right? That's what my sense is on the situation.
Has Green Bay picked anybody up? Because they were in the mix.
They could be in the mix too, but I feel like at this point of his career, to transition out into a different scheme and a totally different offense with a different quarterback structure, I don't know. It's just a different situation, right? To go play.
Yeah, that's not a bad point.
And they just brought back Aaron Jones on a huge contract, so they're going to let Aaron Jones play a lot of those snaps, and he's a good pass catcher. So I doubt that they're going to take Aaron Jones when you pay him that kind of money. He's going to play all 3 downs unless he's hurt, right? So I think with James White, he's got 2 choices. I think it's back here or it's to Tampa Bay. And I think you could see a situation like with David Andrews, where you go out on the market, you see what is out there, and maybe you just feel like the grass isn't always greener, right? And you end up coming back here to New England. And I think with David Andrews too, and so we can talk about this a little bit now, the situation of adding all these players in free agency and making all these big moves, I think that some of these players that were maybe looking elsewhere at the beginning of free agency recognize, hey, Bill's building something here, right? This is actually, we got some guys now. We're going to be a much more competitive team next year. You know, this is something that if you're David Andrews, who had choices, he had options to go elsewhere for more money and longer term in some cases. I think that you can talk yourself into now this New England team being a whole lot better than maybe some of your other choices. So maybe signing Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith tells James White, hey, I should probably just go back to the Patriots and be a part of what they're putting together there.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to see that. I think with Andrews too, I wonder if just the market wasn't out there for him, right? Again, if Miami's willing, and we talked about this last night, if Miami's willing to take Matt Skura, who I'm still not convinced. I mean, I think he's going to be their starting center because the market's pretty much dried up. But, you know, if they're going to take him as their starting center, he's not as good as David Andrews. So I wonder if there was a financial element there. But home run, absolute home run getting him back.
Yeah.
I do feel bad for Ted Karras.
So do I. Because everybody in that everybody in that situation thought that David Andrews was going elsewhere. I mean,
right. And by the way,
tweeted out or Instagrammed out a goodbye, a farewell to David Andrews.
Yeah. And Ted and David are close. Obviously played the same position for 4 years. So I wouldn't be shocked if Ted heard from David himself, hey, I'm not going back. Like, I think this was something that I don't think the reports were false that Andrews was leaving. I think he truly believed he was leaving and things changed, but absolute home run. They're going to have a great offensive line. The one thing I wonder now, and Evan, you can probably speak to this better than I can.
Yeah.
Right. We kind of closed the door on the Isaiah Wynn trade after Marcus Cannon got dealt, but could Ted Karras is not a bad player. Could you play him at guard, move Onwenu to right tackle, Trent Brown plays on the left side, and then maybe re-explore the idea of trading Isaiah Wynn? I think you're playing players out of position. I don't know that I totally support that, right? You do move Trent Brown to left tackle, which I like, but you move Onwenu from guard to tackle, which I don't. But do you believe, like, is that a path maybe they could look at? Or even, let's say Wynn gets hurt, because we know that's a possibility of Ted Karras maybe playing some guard here.
Absolutely. I think Ted Karras can play some guard. I think he's better at center because the athleticism at guard hurts you even more, right? That ability we talked about, the struggles in the running game, ability to get up to the second level of the defense, move in space, things like that. If your guard is having that type of shortcoming, then it's much harder to scheme around, because with center, most of the time the center is not blocking one-on-one, right? You're usually combo blocking and then up to the second level, or you're looking for work because there's nobody lined up over you in a lot of fronts. It's not a situation where you're always having to block somebody right directly in front of you or a primary player in the running scheme. The Patriots don't pull the center a whole lot. They don't lead with the center a whole lot, right? Those are usually the guards, Jack Mason, in particular, Joe Thuney in the past. That's who the guys that they pull. So I think that the center position is one position that you can kind of get away with not having the best player in New England's scheme, whereas guard is a little bit tougher. But I think what you mentioned with Ted Karras is just depth is always great to have. And I feel really bad for Ted too. I think that he got kind of two-timed, I guess, a little bit.
I mean, I saw some people, I wouldn't go there. I saw some people saying maybe the Patriots were disingenuous.
I don't think the Patriots were.
Right, you have to operate wrong place, wrong time. You have to operate with the information you have. They did that. They thought Andrews was going. If they wait, and then they lose Karras, and then Andrews doesn't come back, they're in trouble. You also can't just say no to David Andrews, right? No, we have Ted Karras. Andrews is a better player.
Let's also keep in mind, someone always gets hurt. Right. And we talked about Isaiah Wynn potentially getting hurt, and that always happens too. So maybe it ends up being him, but somebody always gets hurt. So at some point in time, Ted Karras is going to get an opportunity to play. I can guarantee that, because not all five guys are not going to stay healthy on the line all year. And I think the flexibility that you have now with Ted Karras as your top interior backup, and knowing that Michael Onwenu can just move around anywhere you need him to play besides probably left tackle, he can play four spots, right? So if Trent Brown gets hurt, you slide him over to right tackle. If Isaiah Wynn gets hurt, Trent Brown flips back over to left, Michael Onwenu goes to right, Ted Karras goes to left guard. Those are the types of flexibility that you want along the offensive line. And just like a couple seasons ago when Ted started at center when David Andrews went out with the lung thing, that came out of nowhere, right? It was during training camp. All of a sudden, David Andrews has a blood clot in his lung and is out for the entire season. You just don't know when that rainy day is going to come. So having the insurance and having the backup in a player that can be a starter in Ted Karras is extremely valuable, regardless of, the situation is not ideal for Ted. I'm sure he wanted to get a real competitive chance to start, but he'll play at some point. They're going to need him at some point. And having a guy that's as sturdy as he is back there is a very, very good thing to have.
Yeah, it as good as the starting five are, and they're arguably the best in the league, the depth is really might be their strength between Herron and Karras. And I mean, can we? I know you're a Yodny guy.
I am a Yodny guy.
Are we writing him off yet, or is there still?
He's going to be good to go. I mean, that's what I was told, is that he's going to be good to go for training camp, and he's going to be healthy. Now the question is, I think, can he stay healthy, and can he stay on the field, which has been a problem, but B, can he get up to speed to be able to even contribute, right? Is he going to be able to get out there and actually, at this point, being away from competitive football for so long? I mean, he's basically hasn't played a down of competitive football in 2 years. So is he going to have that ability this season, or is he basically going to be a redshirt player that they kind of carry? In the meantime, maybe they even get him onto the practice squad because nobody's seen him play in a couple of years, and they're able to go that route with it. I don't know, but he's going to be there. He's going to be on the team. He's going to be out there at training camp, and it's going to be really interesting to see if they can get anything out of that player. But I love the depth of the offensive line. I love the strength of the starting five. And again, as crappy of a situation as it turned out to be for Ted Karras, and this was a true 180. Nobody in New England, nobody in David Andrews' camp expected David Andrews to come back. That's why the Patriots moved so quickly on Ted Karras, was to be able to go, continue forward without a real hole at center. And nobody thought that this was going to happen, and here we are. So, worse things have happened, certainly from a Patriots point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to get into the signing today, and then we can do a little Q&A here?
About Rayquan Mcmillan, who is a player that I think had some upside, certainly coming out of college. He's a second-round pick, right? And he never really lived up to it in Miami and along the way, but this is definitely a player that I think has some skill. He has some athleticism, and he can definitely play. He can definitely play in the kicking game too, right? So the guy they lost earlier today as well was Brandon Copeland, And Rayquan Mcmillan, I feel like, can at least step right into that Brandon Copeland role of playing in the kicking game and being productive there. And then maybe he can blossom in. Now, there's not going to be a lot of playing time for him this year, obviously, with all the linebackers that they've brought back. But maybe they can see him in a couple of seasons being a player and they end up signing him back next year. It's a 1-year contract for this year. So I think that he's going to have a spot on the roster, though, and maybe even a spot on the game day roster just based off of his special teams contributions.
So, yeah, I actually wrote a good amount about Rayquan Mcmillan this morning. You can find it on 985thesportshub.com. You mentioned him kind of struggling after the hype in college. And this is another guy like Markevious Adams we talked about yesterday. Markevious Adams was the 13th overall recruit in the 2013 class. Mcmillan was the 13th overall recruit the next year in 2014. 2 spots, by the way, ahead of Deshaun Watson. But this was a guy, great linebacker at Ohio State. 2nd round pick. He probably slipped in the draft. Some people expect him to be at the end of the 1st round. And then in the preseason, his rookie year, he tore his ACL. And he missed his rookie season. So, you worry about that, the athleticism, because this was a guy that was pure athleticism. The idea was he's a freak athlete, big, strong guy, and you're going to kind of fine-tune him at the next level. Comes back off the torn ACL, starts 16 games for the Dolphins, had 100 tackles, and was a really good player, and then kind of took a step back the next year, but still played a considerable amount. He started 13 games. He still had, I think it was in the 70s, 80s. I mean, he was still tackling. But then he gets traded to Vegas, and they just stopped using him. 16% usage rate on defense, but his special teams rate spiked to 63%. So that's where it comes in. So I think, like you said, worst case scenario, here's a guy who's going to be a special teams contributor and is going to help them in the kicking game. You mentioned him possibly replacing Brandon Copeland. I think that's a role he could certainly fit. But the upside here, I think, is tremendous because you talked about how, we're kind of putting the linebackers into 2 groups, right? There's the veterans in Hightower, Van Noy, and Judon. And then there's the younger group in Winovich, Uche, and Jennings. There is one guy who we haven't talked about who's kind of lost in between, and that's Juwan Bentley. And
spot.
I think so not only is it a tough spot for him, but I think what Mcmillan does if he's fully healthy is essentially he's a better Juwan Bentley. He's a guy that's going to come downhill with reckless abandon and blow up run plays. This is what he did. And it's not just between the tackles. He can do it sideline to sideline. So worst case scenario, they get a good special teams player. Best case scenario, they upgrade over Juwan Bentley, and you get a guy that if you can teach him a little bit about pass rushing, could potentially, he's not going to be Donta Hightower, but could potentially be a bridge guy in the Donta Hightower role if he steps away soon. So I absolutely love the upside with this signing. We'll see. There's a decent chance he just ends up on special teams, but I remember I was a huge fan of his at Ohio State. Huge fan of his coming out in the draft. He's the kind of guy that, with the athleticism that they can turn around. It's just a question of, is he healthy? And if he is, look out, because he could be a big-time sleeper.
Right, and he's somebody that I think that they're going to get a longer look at in practice probably than we actually do in games because of their depth at linebacker. But he might be someone that works scout team next year or works second team defense or something like that in practice, and he really pops for them, and they're able to kind of keep him as a diamond in the rough type player behind the scenes. And I agree with you 100% with his upside. At Ohio State, these are the types of guys that you look for every single year in the draft for the Patriots. Somebody that's athletic, that can be 250 pounds, play that inside linebacker spot with a little bit of a hammer, right? You want to be able to come downhill and be able to hit some people. That's what the Patriots have always looked for, and that's what this player is. Juwan Bentley is another guy. I don't know if Juwan Bentley has any sort of trade market whatsoever. Maybe Houston wants him. Maybe Miami wants him. Brian Flores wants him.
The Giants.
And you can just the Giants, sure. Could flip a pick for him on day 3 maybe or something like that to recoup some of that asset. Maybe that's another move the Patriots make to sort of consolidate their roster as well. So Rayquan Mcmillan, 1-year deal. I think that's number 11 of the offseason now for the Patriots, or number 12, something like that.
In terms of total contracts or new additions?
New additions. I think we're at 11.
Is it that high already with the new addition? Maybe. You might actually be right. I lost count. This is out of control.
It is out of control. All right, so we did Andrews. Uncharacteristically aggressive. We did Andrews. We did
I think it was question time.
There is some questions here already, a lot of questions already. There was some questions about this one. So I find this fascinating. I don't even know if it's interesting for the Patriots necessarily, because I don't think that they're in the market. But Kenny Gallaudet is still a free agent, and he's doing this like NBA. I talked about it last night. He's doing this like NBA free agent tour, right, where he's going to the Giants. I think he is. There's a couple of other teams that are interested in him as well, and he's requesting meetings with the GM and the head coach before he even gets a contract offer, right? Before they even really start negotiations at the table.
Right.
So what's going on with Kenny Gallaudet is what's going on with a lot of these wide receivers on the market. Oh, and the other topic that we wanted to talk about tonight was Nelson Aguilar and his contract.
Yep. Also, real quick, Phillip Lindsey, 1 year, 3.25 total, $1 million guaranteed. Patriots absolutely should have been in on that.
Yeah, so I guess maybe the Patriots weren't interested, or the Texans swooped in a little bit higher and were able to take the player. I don't know. It seems
pass blocking could have been an issue. Maybe it came down to that. But if that's the going rate, the Patriot, like if Phillip Lindsey's getting 1/1 guaranteed, a little over 3 total. Yeah. What's the going rate for James White? Like 1.6? I think I would do that in a second.
I think less. I think if Lindsey's gone for 3.25, I think James White's right around 3.
I would do that. Well, so he was 3 total or 3 guaranteed?
I guess three total in my mind. I mean,
it's less than Lindsey. You think he's worth less than Lindsey?
I do at this point. Lindsey's a younger player.
Then they should sign him right now, because that'd be a great deal to bring him back.
Right. All right. So let's get back.
Let's do Aguilar. Sorry, I just want to drop that in.
No, that's okay. It's okay. So let's get back to this Kenny Gallaudet thing, because it relates to Nelson Aguilar. What's happening right now in the wide receiver market is that all these wide receivers that want all this money, and usually the wide receiver market in free agency is insane, right? Usually guys get paid a ton of money all the time. And what we are seeing right now is that most of these guys, just like Juju Smith-Schuster just did, or Will Fuller just did, are going to have to take 1-year deals and hit the open market again next offseason when the cap kind of resurfaces, and moving forward with the new TV deal in 2023 and beyond that. So these wideouts are not getting the money this year. They're just not getting it, right? Kenny Gallaudet wants $18 million a year. He's not touching that number in free agency this offseason. He's not. He would have been better off getting tagged, quite frankly, by the Detroit Lions, and then hitting the open market next offseason. So basically, he's going to have to sign a 1-year tag, same thing as if he got franchise tagged, and move forward to next offseason with hopefully a better cap situation across the league. So the question really boils down to, with Kenny Gallaudet in his position, and Kenny Gallaudet was out. Albert Breer had the report that he didn't want to sign with the Belichick disciple or the Patriots because of his experience with Matt Patricia. Well, now it's sounding a lot like he might end up going to the Giants anyways, just because of the money isn't there across the league. So the Patriots paid 2 years, $22 million and $16 million guaranteed for Nelson Aguilar. And Will Fuller, Juju Smith-Schuster, Kenny Gallaudet, and there's going to be a bunch of other guys in this boat, are going to end up signing 1-year deals at less money per year than what the Patriots signed for Nelson Aguilar. So I get the optics of it look bad for the Patriots, right? It looked like they jumped the gun a little bit on Aguilar and overpaid the player a tad. And maybe they did. But I also think that we're underselling Nelson Aguilar's talent. I think he's a good player. I think he's a good player, and I think he's exactly what the Patriots have been missing on offense, a guy that can separate over the top, that is an explosive playmaker in the passing game, somebody that averaged almost 19 yards per catch last year and was second in the league at that number. So I think that he brings an element that the Patriots have been missing from their offense, and everybody under the sun that's a Patriot fan or Patriot media have been clamoring for the Patriots to be faster on offense. Let's get a receiver that can run. Let's get a receiver that can create big explosive plays down the field. And Nelson Aguilar can do it, but now we're just all unhappy about the contract because all these other guys are not getting paid. So the Patriots sign him to this 2-year deal. They structure it so there's only a $7 million cap hit this year. There's a $15 million cap hit in 2022 with a $10 million dead cap number. So that tells me that if everything works out well with the Patriots this season, Nelson Aguilar is getting an extension to stay in New England after this year. So that's all well and said and good, but I guess the opinion is, do you agree with the consensus that the Patriots should have just waited on Will Fuller or Juju or something like that and gone that route instead of signing Nelson Aguilar to the deal that they did?
Yeah, I do kind of agree that they may have jumped the gun a little bit. I think that and look, this offseason is different, and here's where uncharacteristically aggressive comes back to bite you. the Patriots have always put a ton of stock into how much players make, right? They try to pay along the lines of the depth chart. They look, at external options and see, well, where can we slot this guy between guys on other teams? And that's how they do it. We knew they were going to have to overpay players to come here, right? So overpaying Nelson Aguilar to get him, that's not the part in a bubble that bugs me. It's that now he's making more than Fuller. He's making more than Juju, who granted took less money to return to Pittsburgh. So that one's kind of its own thing. But, why didn't they just wait? Or why didn't they offer this contract to Will Fuller first before they offered it to Nelson?
No, I'll tell you why. Because Will Fuller is made of glass. He never plays.
Okay, so why didn't they offer this, any of these other guys? And maybe they did, but why didn't they offer it to Kenny Gallaudet first? Why didn't they offer it to whoever else? Why didn't they offer it to Corey Davis first? Why didn't they, if the goal was to just get a big body guy who's fast, right? You could, and we've talked about this. Nelson Aguilar is probably not going to play a ton. Rashad Perryman, right? It got big body, moves quickly. There you go. You don't have to pay him nearly as much. So if the goal was Nelson Aguilar, that's probably what it took to get him in the door. The bigger issue for me is, what did they see in Nelson Aguilar that made him the guy that they were going to overpay? They were always going to overpay a wide receiver. That was going to be the price of doing business. That part doesn't bother me. I just don't get why he's the one they chose to overpay. When they made that signing at the time, right, it was like, get ready to see the numbers on Will Fuller. Get ready to see the numbers on Kenny Gallaudet. If those guys both signed for $20 million a year, I don't think we're having this conversation. It's just, they signed Nelson Aguilar. Okay, cool. I think it's more about Bill clearly saw something there. And I'm actually going to look up while you answer, because I've been talking about the recruiting rankings all week. Maybe that was it. Maybe it's something buried in his college tape.
Can I tell you what he saw? All right. Yeah. So what they saw with Nelson Aguilar is this. He's a guy that can, like I've been saying, can create big plays. But more so than that, in Philadelphia, Nelson Aguilar played primarily as a slot receiver. Then he went last year over to Las Vegas and played primarily on the outside as an outside receiver. So this is a guy that's got experience both inside and outside the formation. He's got size. He's got speed. He's got an ability to separate over the top. He can play both X and the Z. This is a versatile player with the size-speed combination that they have been missing. And I think that they just like the player. And I think they think he's a good player. And he's at 900 yards with 8 touchdowns last year. And let's see. Over the next couple of years, the contract.
Yeah, sorry, keep going.
No, over the next couple of years of the course of the contract, maybe he doesn't get the targets to get over 1,000, right? Because of Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. But if he gets the targets, if he's almost close to 100 targets, he's going to go over 1,000 yards as a receiver next year for them. And that's a player that I think that they have seen in the past that they think can work out here. To me, Nelson Aguilar is a lot more like a Chris Hogan type, but with much better speed. Right, I
can see the Hogan comparison. That's a good, but they never would have paid Chris Hogan this much,
right? Because Chris Hogan didn't run a 4.42 and can actually create big plays over the top, right? So
I guess my question to you, and by the way, I looked up Aguilar 47th in that class, 6th receiver ahead of Amari Cooper, ahead of Sterling Shepard.
He was a very, very versatile player that has experience playing both inside and outside, condensed formations. He blocks. He runs down the field well. And when you watch him play on tape, he is somebody that I just continue to see as so much faster than any of the other Patriots receivers that they have had over the last couple of seasons. He moves at a different speed than somebody even like a Damiere Byrd, who times faster than he does, but Damiere Byrd doesn't run as physically and as fast as Nelson Aguilar does.
He's definitely an upgrade over Damiere Byrd. I'm not going to disagree with you there. My question is, they've always avoided the career year guys, right? A guy who kind of flatlines and then just spikes. They've generally stayed away from those guys. What makes Aguilar different? And at the same time, so you just mentioned all those things he can do, right? Was there nobody else available who could do all of that?
Name a guy that could do all of that and never misses time and is always healthy. Because Will Fuller is the only guy
that's what I'm asking you. So that answers my question then. So there really isn't anybody else. So that's why.
Not in this free agent market. Maybe in the draft you could talk yourself into some of the guys in the draft is filling that role. But in terms of having durability, size, speed, versatility, I don't think there's anybody else that checks any of those boxes, because the only other guy that has his level of speed out on the field is Curtis Samuel. And Curtis Samuel is basically a kind of gadget inside type of receiver, right? He's either a gadget player or he's playing out of the slot. He's not somebody that was very productive on the outside or did that a whole lot. So mainly what I'm getting at is that I think that they actually just really like Nelson Aguilar, and maybe they'll end up being wrong about it, and maybe I'll end up being wrong about it as a result. But guys like Corey Davis, guys like Juju, guys like Will Fuller, who's not as healthy, all of these people are different types of players than Nelson Aguilar is.
I would, if they just wanted an upgrade over Damiere Byrd, a guy who could stretch the field a little better than Damiere Byrd, I would have gone Rashad Perryman for what did he get, $3 million, $5 million?
But Rashad Perryman's not going to put up the numbers that Nelson Aguilar is going to put up. He's just not. Rashad Perryman's got no chance of putting up 1,000-yard season, right? You're talking about a guy that fill the role, just like Philip Dorsett did, just like Damiere Byrd did. But I don't be a difference maker in that role.
And I'm pretty high on Philip Dorsett. I don't see Aguilar that much of an upgrade. He's an upgrade, but not that much. And by the way, just real quick here, yards per reception, Rashad Perryman the last 3 years, 21, 18, 17. It's probably more of a durability issue with him is where I'd go, because he has trouble staying on the field. But if the goal, I don't know that they needed, given how much they used Damiere Byrd last year, and he was on the field a ton, right? But they didn't throw to him a lot. Given how much they used Damiere Byrd, did they need that much of an upgrade? Did they need to spend that much of an upgrade? So let's see how much they throw to him. If they only target him when they target Damiere Byrd 30 times, I think we go look back and doesn't call it a mistake. If that role becomes a larger part of the offense and he can handle it and he doesn't drop 10 passes, then yeah, this contract works out. I think it's a risky signing. It's a very risky signing, the kind of signing they don't usually make.
I don't know how risky it is. I think they know who the player is. I feel pretty good about it. I do. I think that this
what do you attribute the struggles in Philly to? Just him playing out of the slot?
I think that the struggles in Philly were a lot of things. I think Philly was an issue for him in terms of the pressure on him and in terms of all those types of things. Whereas in New England, he's going to have similar things with the Boston media, certainly. But I also feel like Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith are going to have the weight of the world on their shoulders more so than Nelson Aguilar, right? So I think that there are other guys in that locker room now that are going to kind of take over that mantle. He's going to be problem number 5 or 6 on the list behind Cam Newton, behind Jonnu, behind Hunter Henry if there are issues, right?
As long as he's not dropping the ball. I'm telling you, that first drop in the fourth quarter, that's going to be Felger and Maz all week.
And drops is an overrated stat too, but that's another rant for another day. Let's get to some more of these questions. So this one's, I think, really interesting as well. There's some other names that he threw in here, or she threw in there, but I want to talk about Akeem Hicks, the first name on this list. Josh Gordon, Sammy Watkins, we can ignore, but Akeem Hicks requested a trade from Chicago. He's going to get traded from the Bears. We know he played well in this system, but he wants another contract on top of the contract he already has, and he wants a raise. The Patriots, I think, feel a little bit like Akeem Hicks is the one that got away at times, right? You know, he was a player that they kind of found and knew that he was an ascending player, but they let him walk to Chicago anyways. They tried really hard to keep him. Remember that story is that Bill Belichick actually himself got on the phone and called Akeem Hicks and tried to convince him to stay in New England for a little bit less money than he got in Chicago. He ends up going to the Bears. Now he wants out of Chicago for good reason. Maybe the Patriots kick the tires. They don't have a player on their defensive line right now that can play, that is as good of a player as Akeem Hicks, right? He's a true difference maker on your D-line, unless you want to count Judon as a defensive lineman. They don't have one of those types of guys in the interior of their defensive line. So I would absolutely love to see them entertain bringing Akeem Hicks back. The question is, are you willing to pay him what he wants? Because he wants $10+ million in his next contract.
Yeah, that's just going to be tough to justify. Really good player. Really, really good player. I think with all the money they've pumped into the front seven, though, it's just, you know, if they don't sign Godshow and maybe they don't bring back Van Noy and, you know, maybe they don't bring back Wise, like I think we're talking about a little more, but I just think they've invested so heavily there. You're going to have to give up a premium pick to get him. You're going to have to pay him a ton of money. I don't think he's ultimately worth what it's going to take to get him back. Look, if they do it and they figure it out, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It's just, it doesn't seem like the asset management are out to me.
I think at this
point, same for Gino Atkins, by the way. He's probably cheaper, but again, and there's only so many snaps to go around, and he's talented, but you got to get some of these other guys playing too.
I think, unfortunately, at this point of the offseason, the ship has probably sailed on a guy like Akeem Hicks. If they still had $45 million in cap space and Akeem Hicks requests this trade, maybe we could have the conversation a little bit deeper. Right now, they probably are saving that money, I would think, for a big move at wide receiver, maybe a quarterback, maybe something like that. So I don't know if they want to
maybe Gilmore.
Maybe Gilmore. I don't know if they want to lose that cap flexibility of giving it to Akeem Hicks and then not being able to make a move for Deshaun Watson if he comes available, right? You don't want to be in that situation where you're like, oh, we had this opportunity, but now we have to scramble with the cap to make it work. You don't want to be put yourself in that position. There was a bunch of questions here about, I'm trying to look for a couple of them, about Stephon Gilmore. It was Jeff Howe of The Athletic who reported that the Patriots are not, at least right now, the Patriots are not actively shopping Stephon Gilmore in a trade. Could an extension happen? I mean, where are we right now with Stephon Gilmore?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's hard to tell.
Right.
I mean, not shopping him can mean they're not shopping him. Not shopping him can also mean the team told somebody to tell somebody to tell somebody to tell everybody. You got to increase those offers. We're going to need a little bit more. So we'll see what happens with that. I think they are into the idea of moving on from either Gilmore or Jackson, and I just don't think they know which one yet. And some of that's going to depend on what happens with J.C. Jackson as an RFA. I think the deadline is April, I want to say 23rd. I know it's before the draft, so we'll have a chance to figure it out before the draft. But I think they'd like to keep Gilmore regardless. I think if Gilmore's contract was more sturdy on his end, I don't think this would be an issue. It's just a matter of, if they could throw him $16, $17 million to just play one more year, I think they'd do it. I don't know that he takes that. I think he wants the big long-term contract. That he's 30. So this is his last chance at a big long-term contract. I think he wants that. And I don't know that they want to give him that money right now. I think if they're going to spend that money, they'd rather be a younger corner like J.C. Jackson or perhaps somebody they can get in free agency. Next year's free agency corner class is supposed to be loaded. So, I think it's just going to come down to, will Gilmore take one more year? Maybe it's 2 more years. Does somebody try to claim Jackson? I don't think anybody knows with Stephon Gilmore right now. And J.C. Jackson as well. I think it's totally up in the air.
My read on the Stephon Gilmore situation is that Bill Belichick feels as though his roster has improved significantly, and they could actually make things interesting in 2021, especially if Cam Newton plays better than he did last year. Maybe they can be a playoff team. Maybe they can be a team that goes on a little bit of a run with the moves that they have made. And trading Stephon Gilmore, like I said last night, instantly makes your team worse. Regardless of what you get back, unless you're getting a first-round pick back, which I don't think you are, you're instantly getting worse with Stephon Gilmore not on your team versus on your team. So I think the Patriots are looking at it now, and they say, okay, this has changed things a little bit about our outlook. No longer, because we were able to attract these guys here, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, no longer do we have to look at this as a 3-year rebuild, right? This can be an expedited, we can do this in one offseason potentially. Now,
that's all going to come down to the quarterback, but that's another conversation.
I'm not saying they're going to win a Super Bowl next year. I'm just saying that they can be a much more competitive team this offseason or next season because of their offseason that they had. And I feel like they want to hold on to Gilmore as a result. And they have if they wanted to get the absolute most for this asset, they would have traded him last offseason probably. That's how they probably could have gotten the most return for the player. As soon as they went by the trade deadline last year without a trade, it kind of felt like Gilmore was in a position where they were sort of waiting to see what they were able to put together, right? And now they're able to put together a much better roster. You're much more optimistic about the team that you have out there, and maybe they want to keep on to Gilmore to maintain this roster that they've built, because you start running him out of town or you start trading him or whatever, the team gets worse. It's that simple. All right, how about last couple questions here. How about playoff Lenny? Leonard Fournette, the Patriots have continued to kick the tires on this market. They did it last time out. Do you have any interest right now in Leonard Fournette? Chris Carson just signed.
Nope. Unless they're going to trade Sony Michel. Unless the concept is to sign Leonard Fournette and trade Sony Michel, which is interesting to me. You have two good early down backs. I don't care how many passes Leonard Fournette caught last year. I don't care how many he caught that 1 year in Jacksonville. He's a mess of a receiver. One of the biggest problems with the Tampa offense early, before Tom Brady told Bruce Arians to go sit in the corner, was they were forcing throws to Leonard Fournette when they had Ronald Jones on the roster, and it made no sense. Just because a guy catches passes, well, technically makes him a receiving back. It doesn't make him a good receiving back. There's no room for Leonard Fournette on this roster as it stands right now. He's not by any means a replacement for James White. He's going to cost you too much. Stay away. Unless you think you can get something of value for Sony Michel, which you maybe can, and Fournette's not a bad replacement for Sony, stay away from Leonard Fournette.
I'm just pulling up all these questions as everybody keeps asking about Leonard Fournette.
Yeah, and stop with playoff Lenny. That thing's stupid. That thing is stupid.
So I
think Brady won them those games. Tom Brady won them those games. The defense won them those games. Playoff Lenny. Most overrated running back since college.
We gotta clip that out. But what you just said is really key, right? Is that, okay, if the goal is to move on from Sony Michel and trade him, then maybe Leonard Fournette makes sense, right?
Yeah, sure.
Point. But if you're going to roster both Damian Harris and Sony Michel, there's no point in paying Leonard Fournette anything to bring him here as the third power back on your roster. Maybe he ends up being the best out of the three for a year, just because he has one of those. I'm not saying I think he's the best player out of the three looking at it on paper, but maybe he ends up having a good year, or maybe he ends up popping and the other two are struggling and you pull him out there and he's actually plays well. Who knows, right? And you can talk yourself.
Any back's going to play well behind this offensive line.
That's fair too. And see, you're making my points for me. Like this is why I don't want to get anything to do with the running backs, because I know the running backs are going to produce that are on the team. I just don't. That's what I don't understand about all this is why are we doing this? And secondly to that, my biggest fear about all of this is that because Bill Belichick has continued to kind of kick the tires on all these running backs in the draft, in free agency, especially those power backs, that he's going to end up drafting one in the top 100 again. And
this isn't, I consider it's not that kind of draft. You're either taking Etienne or Najee Harris between picks 25 and 35, or you're waiting. There aren't a ton of intermediate backs in this draft. And I would say, and somebody brought this up.
I like the kids from North Carolina. I think both those guys can play.
I think you can get them very back end of the top 100, outside of the top 100, and they would be fits. Somebody brought up like James Conner. Actually, if the plan is to trade Sony, I'd rather James Conner than Leonard Fournette.
I don't know if I would, but I would like James Conner better than Leonard Fournette as the third power back on the roster. If that's the way you're going to go, you need like a Mike Gillislee, right? You don't need to pay somebody $5-6 million to play that role. You need to pay somebody $1 or $2 million at most to pay that role. And maybe James Conner ends up coming here on a low money deal because there's no money anywhere, and that's the situation that we're in.
Right. If they want to bring one of these guys into camp on $900K, like who'd they do that with last year?
Jeremy Hill. I think they did.
Last year, and he didn't make the team. He was hurt the whole time.
Lamar Miller.
Lamar Miller. Like if they want to do that, with Leonard Fournette, if it gets to that point, if they want to do that with James Conner, fine.
Right.
The focus needs to be the pass catching back. It needs to be Duke Johnson. It needs to be one of those guys. James White returns certainly. I think Rex Burkhead you rule out because of the knee, and then they draft somebody, and then you have White or a veteran and a rookie, and then you move on from White next year. And people are saying like, well, Sony's contract is up next year, so sign Fournette. Leonard Fournette's going to sign a 1-year contract.
Oh, yeah.
Leonard Fournette will be available at this time next year. If you want to replace Sony Michel with Leonard Fournette, you can do that. You do not have to do it right now by any means.
Okay, so I wanted to pull up one more question because you're the jersey helmet guy.
Okay.
And I'm actually curious about this myself.
I think I actually have a Pats helmet around here somewhere.
Because Jess really wants herself a Hunter Henry jersey. So I got to get her a Hunter Henry jersey at some point. She's a big Hunter Henry fan and is very excited that he's here in New England. When did the jerseys go on sale, Alex? This is your domain.
Ooh, so I'm a big uniform guy. I don't buy a ton of jerseys. I say is there's a huge box of jerseys in the closet.
Yeah, I don't buy that.
Not in a while. I used to, and I used to just kind of accumulate that. I think I have like 15 or 16. At some point, we'll do a Q&A where I'll run through all my jerseys. When do they become see, that's tough. I think it's usually when the signing becomes official.
Right. So I saw it on NFL.com.
Hold it up right now.
Matt Judon has a jersey, but it doesn't have a number on it yet.
So that's what they do. You can generally buy I don't know what the question is. You can generally buy them right away, but they might not start making them for a little bit, so they get backlisted. Like they had Cam as number 0 last year when he first signed.
Right.
Like, they were available that night, but they didn't ship for a couple months.
Right. So there's this number 0 Matt Judon jersey right now in an NFL.com Patriots shop that you can go out and buy. There's nothing on Hunter Henry yet, but he signed his contract today officially. So did Johnny Smith.
Right. It has to be official.
I would anticipate in the next couple of days that you'll be able to, like you said, purchase a jersey from those guys, but you probably aren't going to receive that jersey until they start printing them with the numbers.
Are we getting paid by the pro shop for this segment? Right?
I don't know. We probably should be, but I was just wondering if you had any information on it because jersey.
I'm not great on that. The thing I will say is I know some people don't like to buy jerseys the team doesn't wear. You'd be surprised how many people have that take. Like if you remember, do you remember they used to sell the black and white Patriots jerseys?
Yeah.
And like people didn't like buying them because they're like the team doesn't actually wear those. If you're one of those people, don't be afraid to buy the red jersey this year.
I think the one thing maybe you don't know about the jerseys, but I know you're going to be all in on the jersey numbers when those are released.
Big jersey number guy. There you go.
Where did Hunter Henry he put up a photo swap, whatever those things are called, with 6, but that's Devin Asiasi's number. Not saying that Devin Asiasi shouldn't give up his number to Hunter Henry, but Hunter Henry is going to have to buy that number, ask for that number, or something like that. But it's interesting to talk about all because there's so many new players. I mean, they're all going to need a jersey number.
The interesting one is Van Noy and Uche.
Right. So somebody mentioned that. Does Uche give 53 back to Van Noy? Does Van Noy even want 53 back? Where does that situation kind of go? I don't know. Okay, so Pat's chatter here. He's with us a lot. He says the Patriots have a top 5 worst jersey in the league. I don't know about that. I think the new ones are pretty good.
The old ones are so much better. So the white ones, the road ones are growing on me. They are. I like those. The home ones. The home ones are brutal. I hated them when they were the color rush. If they did any different color pants besides blue, David Andrews looks like a blueberry. He looks like, what was her name from Willy Wonka? Veruca Salt.
David Andrews had a weird jersey thing, right? Where like the font was like different.
Yeah, they were reusing jerseys from the year before. I don't know what was going on with that. I'll tell you this though. There's a real chance. There is a real, and this isn't like my report. This isn't my take. This has been out there. I think UniWatch had this first on Twitter. There is a real chance the red jerseys with the white helmets come back this year. And if they're popular enough, so you might remember this, the Browns had those really bad uniforms a couple years ago. And they were and you're only allowed to change your uniforms every 5 years based on the league rule. We're really getting into it here, but the viewers are going up. I appreciate that. So what they did was because the uniforms were so bad, they couldn't change. They made the alternate uniform their main one. So if they bring the red ones back and we all complain enough about how bad the blue ones are, they'll start wearing the red ones more than the blue ones. People
like that. All right. So
and the silver jerseys, don't bring back the silver jerseys. On low def TV, they just look like the white ones got muddy.
So I that's definitely true. So I'll put it at this. I think all these jerseys are going to go up for sale very, very soon if they're not up already. I told you Matt Judon is already up there for purchase. You're just going to have to wait a couple of weeks until they print them and get their numbers solidified and all that kind of stuff. But this is the longest that we've ever talked about jerseys. So Alex is all excited over there. I know that. This is
the whole selling them. It's more the jersey number and I'm looking at the website now. They're selling the current jersey, but Randy Moss. That feels like sacrilege. Matt Light. Jim Nance, they're selling the current jersey and Jim Nance. No, don't do that. Troy Brown one looks kind of cool.
Well, I like the jersey thing. I've always had jerseys. I don't wear them anymore, obviously, but back in the day, I had a bunch of jerseys for the Patriots: Rodney Harrison, Teddy Bruschi, Richard Seymour, Adam Vinatieri at one point because I loved me some Adam Vinatieri. Obviously, had Brady, Wes Welker. I mean, we both probably have a box somewhere that has about 500 Patriots jerseys.
Yeah,
I have the ones that from me when I was a little kid anymore, because obviously those haven't fit in 10 years. But it's definitely a fun conversation.
We'll do when we get into the summer and we need like a day where there's nothing going on. I think we'll do maybe a jersey reveal. Maybe what are those things they do when the artists they play each other's songs back and forth, decide who's better? We'll take our jerseys and we'll hold them up one back and forth, and we'll see who wins, who the people think has the better jersey.
Murph has been in the chat tonight, and he says that you need therapy, Alex.
Hey, you're not the first person
for your jersey obsession, apparently. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us all week. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Patriots Press Pass. We're going to be back next week, probably more on a regular schedule, but we're going to try to do as many shows as possible moving forward. Alex mentioned it last night. We're going to do live mock drafts with you guys, and we'll kind of throw out different scenarios. Okay, this is a scenario where the Patriots are going to trade up for a quarterback. This is a scenario where they're going to trade back, and we'll kind of walk through all the different types of possibilities for the Patriots, because all of us know that none of us know what Bill Belichick's actually going to do in the end of April during the draft, so we'll just throw all of them out there. But until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody, and thanks for watching all week. We really appreciate it.